This is a Hayward S pump filter. There's the motor and the valve housing. They have a heater. What happens over time when you take your gauge out, you're supposed to take your gauge out in the fall and put it back in the spring, because if you leave it on here in the winter time, it's gonna mess up the gauge, and you wind up having to buy a new one. So you just take that in the house with you, keep it warm over the winter time. Don't let it freeze. Over time, the plastic threads and the valve housing wear out, and this pool's probably been here 30 years. It's a pretty good pool. Love it a lot. And after a while, not enough this tape, this Teflon tape, will do the trick. It won't hold it in there right. It'll leak anyway, and you wind up using hot glue. Hot glue works great as a temporary fix or for any kind of cracks or anything you have in here. But what you need to do this job correctly is you need to go down to a hardware store, Home Depot, Menards, Granger, True Value, whatever you want. Get yourself a twin male connection. That's a connection that connects two female pieces onto it on either side. It's a fitting. These are called fittings. This is a double female fitting. This will take two males on either side. So what I did was I stuck this water weld, JB Weld product on there. This is a great product. I used this a little bit of this other kind of product. It didn't work so well. If you're going to do this, get the JB Weld water weld. It works a lot better. Holds up over time. It gets a lot harder. So get yourself a twin male fitting and a twin female fitting, and you screw those together tightly with some of your Teflon tape, PTFE tape, and then you screw that whole thing into your water weld, and you just let it sit there for a minute, and then you work up the rest of it. You work up the rest of the stuff, or I didn't use all of it, but I used the majority of it, and you just go around it. It's like clay. You just, work it around, get it in there, and you set this thing in. The thing's hard as steel. It's not going anywhere. I could wrench on this and it wouldn't bust it. Of course I wouldn't want to do that, but I'm just demonstrating to you how well of a fix that's going to be for you by telling you that. When you get a gauge, you have to make sure that it has a small little petcot valve in there. This gauge came from a pool store. This little tiny itty bitty little valve piece right here fits inside the hole on this thing. It limits the flow of water to the gauge, and the reason it does that is if it was wide open, if this gauge didn't have a small little valve piece in there to slow the flow of water into there, this gauge would be wiggling back and forth like this. You wouldn't have an accurate reading. It would be throttling back and forth so quickly you couldn't tell where it was at. That's the problem I came up with when I went to Home Depot and I got their cheap $10 gauge. As you can see there, it's a much bigger hole in comparison with the other gauge. This is actually a 3/8 gauge right here. 3/8 threading. Okay? Normally, what fits into this right here is called a quarter. It's a 1/4 size or 1/4 size threading. Okay, that's bigger. The one I got at the pool store just so happens to have this little valve which slows the flow of water just slightly. And you get an accurate, steady reading right here, which it stays right about there, 16.5 all the time. Normal operating pressure for Hayward S filter is 16 to 17 psi. See if I can do a side-by-side view here. This one right here. This is the $10 Home Depot 3/8 size gauge. Okay, it's bigger. The opening for water is bigger. You can clearly see it. This one came from a pool store. It has a little petcot valve or the little limiter, whatever you want to call it. Don't get this one. This one from Home Depot came with this, which is a reducer style type of fitting. It's a brass fitting. It does work, but the needle jumps around a lot. And that's a sign of having air in the system. But there's no air in this system. It's just that this does not have that little little valve. And as you can see, the needle is bumping around. It's jiggling. That's because it doesn't have that little tiny valve. It looks like a fitting within a fitting. A piece of brass within a piece of brass. A circle within a circle. That's what it looks like on the bottom, on the inside piece of the gauge opening. This one doesn't have it, and I got it from Home Depot, and it bounces around like that. It's not giving me an accurate reading. This is a pool filter, or a pool filter gauge. This is the correct gauge. As you can see, it's not bouncing, it's not fiddling around, it's just staying steady in one spot. So that's what that little tiny piece of brass inside the opening does. It keeps it steady.